So hello and welcome to our show, The Awakening, here on WGSN-DB, the Going Bold and Going Solo Network. The information and opinions expressed on this show are just that, the opinions of the individual speaking based on their individual personal experiences.
Hey, hold on. You're not live yet. You're not live yet.
Okay.
Yeah, look, but there should be a little thing that comes across saying you're live. Sergio, I'm going to let you push the button.
It does say we're live. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll start all over on that. So welcome to our show, The Awakening, on WGSN-DB, the Going Bold and Going Solo Network. The information and opinions expressed on this show are just that, the opinions of the individual speaking based on their individual personal experiences. They are not designed to constitute complete and professional advice or recommendations. My name is Tina Huggins, and this is Joe Huggins. And we are graced once again with the beautiful Victoria Kirilloff. And Victoria has wonderful letters that go behind her name, CDFA, NCPM, CDS, and all those long alphabets of letters say that she knows exactly what she's talking about when it comes to money. So hello, Victoria, how are you?
Good, thank you so much for having me, Tina and Joe.
Well, we're just really glad that you're here. So it's really cool. I've been paying a lot of attention to the shows that are getting a lot of hits, and your show pulled in a lot of hits. And so that's been, and it hasn't, I think it's been a month, not even a month or something like that you were on. So your show has had a lot of hits. And so we know that, you know, the story from that show, we're going to have to recap that a little bit. But today I would like to dive a little bit deeper into what your role was and how you personally handled things in the days after. So if you could kind of recap a little bit so that viewers that didn't get to watch the first show can hear what went on.
Well, so there's really bad echo. I'm not sure. Do you guys hear that?
No, it's not on our side.
Good on our side.
Okay. Well, that's good. Okay. So I am, I've had the experience of helping people navigate hard life events like divorce and death. And sometimes they can be very close to each other. And especially when you are leaving a toxic relationship, there's a lot that goes into it. And so my job as a certified divorce financial analyst is really to help people navigate the financial component of divorce. So most people aren't aware, but leaving someone's actually like a 4-phase event. There's 4 areas of life you have to focus on. The first being the emotional side. The emotions are so deep. And when you decide that you're going to leave the person, you go through all of these different feelings, and you have to then tell the other person, and they go through their own experiences. And if they're a high conflict individual, well, your emotional phase of divorce can really sometimes go throughout everything else. Mm-hmm. And it can really be hard. And so when you are going through this, you should work with a divorce coach like Tina and Joe. And so their job is to kind of help you develop these communication strategies when you're dealing with these high conflict feelings, and to kind of roll through the punches and not get waylaid by the negative emotions that are obviously going to be there. And so, the next phase is the social phase. And this is kind of when you tell everyone. And then moving from there, there's the financial component. And this is really one of the larger and more challenging steps of divorce, because it's so overwhelming. And most people have really negative relationships with money in the first place. And then you're going through a divorce, and you're forced to make all of these really life-altering decisions. And you don't even know your base financial data. And most of us just kind of charge things on our credit card, and it just racks up. And now when you're going through a divorce, the one thing you really need to know is your budget and your lifestyle expenses. So my job is to help people really navigate this, and to figure out what their spousal support amount's going to be, and how they're going to pay it, and divide the rest of their property And sometimes I play a role called financial neutral, which is when you're dealing with a divorce where you have two people that are willing to work together. Sometimes they're high conflict and you're trying to keep them out of court. As a collaborative financial neutral, my job is really to help both parties understand their motivations and divorce goals and navigate the outcome. So I had a client that I was brought on to do the financial component, and the legal side was the negotiation was essentially a traditional divorce in which the attorneys were trained in mediation. So it was a little different of a setup. And as I was going through this case as a financial neutral, I kind of fell in love with the gal, the wife. She was a fascinating woman, and she had a high-power job, and it was just amazing to see what she took on in her professional life. She kind of was in a financially precarious relationship. One might even call it abusive relationship with her first husband, and she really needed a lot of help navigating the divorce post the process. So I helped her navigate, the first portion of her divorce, and then kind of got her back on her feet. And I kind of became her personal financial officer. And, we went through so much together. It really was just a once in a lifetime type of client. She really, grew into this wonderful woman, not being in an abusive and oppressive relationship, but she did have this side where she wanted to be with other people. And, she could kill it in the boardroom, but then in her personal life, being alone, I think, was just something she wasn't willing to do. And she wanted to be happy. I mean, who doesn't want to be happy? And, there was a gentleman that kind of came across her path, and who knows if it was happenstance or kind of contrived, but it turned out to be this guy really put on a lot of airs and was really just looking kind of almost to kind of feed off of my client, of my good friend. And he didn't really have a job, and she made more money than she could really manage, so she was fine taking care of him. And it was just a very chaotic and toxic relationship, and she was very so strong for everyone else. She never wanted to ask for help. And the hardest part about this is she came to me half a year before she started to leave him, saying how there was just a lot of, bad things going on in the relationship. There was probably some suspected drug use and some mental illness issues going on with the boyfriend. And, he had gotten her pregnant, and they had this baby now. And she just really was conflicted, trying to navigate the exiting of the relationship, and then also how she was going to, take care, how the baby was going to be used in all of this. And so it was a lot for her to go through. And, he was becoming a drain on her resources and not really contributing. So she was looking to get him out of her life in a very peaceful way, but she needed to have a very firm hand. And so, fast forward, she says, she plans to break up with him, sends him a letter. And then 3 days later, she winds up dead. And, it is so unbelievable that she would kill herself. But throughout this process, the one thing that I have realized is it is incredibly hard to know what happens. in these situations, especially when you have someone that has been arrested before for strangling women. And, and there's just a lot of things that go into actually getting a conviction or even a charge. I never thought I would ever have to know what it's like to talk about that or to navigate that. But when death is purported to be a suicide, there's no evidence in the police's mind that is not in favor of that. But it's very hard when most women who leave abusive men die within that short window of time after leaving them. And there was this young baby that she loved more than anybody, more than anything. She would have drug her body over broken glass and continued even when she had blood out. She was just a strong woman and running from anything. She wasn't fearful, and she didn't know how to run. So for her to now have gone through this is very terrifying, because she had all of the resources available to her. Everything that her friends and family and I did after her passing is stuff that we could have done when she was alive. And, I remember I've had an abusive relationship, and I remember how hard it was for me to get other people to believe that I was in an abusive situation, where my partner, I call him Voldemort, he was so charming. He had wooed everyone, wooed my mom, she loved him, still does, and asking for help when you're facing someone that has almost an impenetrable facade can seem overwhelming. And in this case, the guy wasn't too charming. He was funny, but a lot of people didn't really support the relationship. They didn't know how to be there and have, communication is everything when you're leaving in a situation like this. And, friends want to stay open to that. So at the end of the day, though, asking for help is really what prevents a lot of people from staying safe. And, it's also admitting, I think, when you finally verbalize what's going on, you're like, holy cow, this is actually going on. This is happening to me. It's not just in my head. And when you're dealing with physical abuse or psychological abuse, there is so much undercutting of your reality that's going on all the time. And so you could be abused and not know it. And I think that's that fog of abuse, right? So many of us navigate that.
Right. And so I find that, Joe and I have talked about this, and we've talked about how you are so strong. So I want to back up here, and this isn't directly into your story, but I have so many young coaches, or new coaches, I should say, that come to me and they're like, how do you talk about this stuff on air? How do you even make little posts about this kind of stuff? I am so afraid that my ex will attack me. And you have had so much strength, one, to deal with all this stuff with your client, and then two, to tell your story. And you've given your ex a name, and you talk about him in that way. And so what has given you the strength to be able to do all of this?
Because he tried so hard to make me seem crazy. He tried so hard to create an alternate reality and get me to believe it. And he would terrorize me in private, but he was charming and cunning and delicious to everyone outside of the house. But to me, he reserved a specific and sadistic type of cruelty. And I will never forget, there was one night when he came after me, and he would get pretty physically abusive, and it was not a good situation. So he came after me one night, and I had to hide behind my dresser. And it was just, I could hear him coming in through the door. And this man had, you know, in The Shining, right? Here's Johnny. He'd done that to me a few different times, and it was so ridiculous. I can't even watch horror movies because my life's really been more of one than any of those films could be. But one time I had so much PTSD because he had, I was hiding from him in the bathroom, and there was a giant mirror on the door, and he was, you know, beating the door down, and he broke the mirror, and the mirror just flew all over me. And it was so otherworldly. It was an out-of-body experience, and I didn't realize how close I came to death at that time. And going back to the time though I was hiding from him by the dresser, I made a promise. I made a prayer, actually. I prayed to God to save me. I was terrified that night that he was going to kill me. And I just prayed to God to help get me out. And if I got out, that I would help other women do the same thing. My life looked so perfect on the outside that no one could ever imagine how lonely and miserable it was to be me. And I know no one was going to care also. I mean, you have to start at home and change your own life. And I was terrified. My dad was no longer around. He was alive, but he suffered a stroke. So it was just on me to have to figure out how to get out of this situation. And my mom was totally bought into Voldemort's image. I knew that I wasn't crazy, and there was a lot of things that were not because of me. And so I guess I have to reclaim my story, I think, is the most important thing. And for me, not only am I fulfilling a promise to God and the universe to try to show at least one way of doing things, right? But it also is allowing me to kind of stand in my own truth, to sound kind of like cliche, right? But honestly, I think sometimes to the outside world, I look like my life is too perfect. And I think that's how most women are, right? We try like hell to put everything and make it beautiful on the outside, but internally we're suffering. And, that's not a healthy way to be. And I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I know there's a huge psychological component to it. And it is like pretty much like you have a bad diet, and also you're super traumatized, and you repress your feelings so they get stored in your body. And for me, part of my healing journey is being like, letting those emotions go. And as hard as it is to talk about, I think what's even worse is to not at least show someone how they can get out. It might not be exactly the same, but you can at least find strength in other people knowing that they have come before you and done it successfully. Yeah.
And I think that, you talk about you and a man, because Joe's been in a very similar, not that she wouldn't have killed him, but he wasn't in where he was hiding behind dressers and stuff. But my dad was one of those who was shot at, and then he was driven over with a dually pickup truck that was heavier than most dualies because of the bed that was on it. And men, just like us women, they put on this strong air about everything. My dad still to this day can't use the word abuse in a sentence with his name in it. And so I think that for people to see that you have been through this, I've been through something much, much less by far. And I believe that my situation was literally that, situational. It was going to get worse. And so I was lucky I did things when I did, but in my case, I ended up with a broken hand and separated ribs several years before I got a dislocated leg. And so I stayed for several years. And so that is something that I really think is super important. And so this is the things with these coaches that are always talking to me, are you ever afraid that your ex is going to hear you and come after you?
I remain, well, I don't really use his name, and he would have to then, I feel like as long as I tell the truth, that's what I have to go by. And, I don't use his name directly. I think he does deserve a level of privacy. I'm not out there, putting a face to the name.
Right,
so
right.
I try to keep it as, this is more about me. This is not about him.
Right, right. And I think that's huge, huge. So I should say, I have been pretty sure, 100% sure in things that Joe's ex has been watching all of these videos this whole time since the first one came out. And the reason why I think, so many people are afraid, they're so afraid of what they're going to do, and being factual about how you feel. And that actually somebody had talked to Cece about all of this with who could attack the studio name, and all of that. So she is the reason why we actually put out the disclaimer, which when we first talked, we didn't have the disclaimer that the information and opinions are expressed here are that in the opinions of those speaking only. They're not fact. We're not here to be counselors and tell you that you are a narcissist or you're dating a narcissist. What we're here for is to let you know that people have been through this and we've got out, and we've got ways to help you get out. And so I think just what you're saying here, Victoria, is that you speak this and it makes you stronger. It makes you feel better. So Joe, I know that I've talked to you about the fact that I know that your ex is more than likely watching these. I'm like 99.9% sure, because she's on my Facebook page under an assumed name. So everything I post, everything I always have known that she's always been able to watch and see everything. And so with you talking like this, how does it make you feel? What do you feel about the whole thing?
Well, just to comment on her characteristics of her sneaking around and hacking into this, hacking into that. I think it was about a year ago, she was hacking into my messenger.
Oh no, it was much longer than that. Okay. We've been together for 7 years.
Well, it's probably a continual thing, probably 7 years plus. But anyways, I turned her into the police and they asked her to come down and file a report, and she knows the law. So she's like, am I being arrested? And they said no. And well, then I'm not coming down. So she just tells them, I'm not coming down. That's it. So she used to track me on my Snapchat, and I got rid of that. So it's just like, I don't need it. She knew what restaurant I was at. She knew who I was visiting, and nobody needs that, and so it just more power for the course to speculate that she's definitely watching these shows. And if I was her, I wouldn't want to watch them, because I don't know what benefit she'd get out of them besides just having to know and wanting to be on her side. Maybe she thinks it's some kind of control, because then she's going to think, well, I'm going to take you to court and I'm going to put you in prison or something like that.
Now, those are things that she said
I've heard
to
that
you
in the past about all kinds of stuff. So it's just more threats and that kind of stuff. So
did you have something there, Victoria?
No.
Okay. So I kind of wanted to delve in a little bit more about your client. So in the days that followed you finding out that your client had died, I know you had shared some stuff with me, and if you're able to, I would like for you to share some stuff with our viewers about what you personally did after you figured all this out.
Well, there's certain things that I just can't really talk about, but you know, I will say that after the fact, you have to go still deal with the person after, you know, even if you think that there's an alleged crime committed, someone has to deal with everything. And that, you know, not a lot of people have actually gone through the passing of someone, and it is a true production under natural circumstances. And literally, you know, once your social security number goes dark, once the government turns it off, all of your money freezes in the bank. And you have to then go through a process of getting a death certificate. And if there's, you know, questions surrounding why, you know, the person passed, then, you know, it takes even longer to get. And when you have a young family, it can be really challenging to figure out all these funding things. And so I think it's a, you know, I hate to say it, but life insurance, you know, really can help a lot of families kind of handle transitions like this. Otherwise, you have the financial stress on top of the, you know, death that you're dealing with. And oh, by the way, you know, there's something happened here. We might not know what, and we may never know what, but understanding what that looks like, you know, is just, it's a whole hell of a lot when you're going through it. And I wish that upon no one, but, you know, there's things that you can do and, you know, start asking for help, going to a domestic violence hotline and start researching things out. Even if you don't think you're in a domestic violence situation, you know, there's certain times when being a little bit more proactive and protective is more beneficial for you. So
yeah, and so in the middle of, and let me ask this to Joe first, in the middle of being in that relationship that was so abusive with your ex, what kind of information would you share with a viewer who is currently in that kind of position? What do you need them to know?
Well, in my case, I think she took out little pieces at a time, so it wasn't some abrupt thing. They kind of tear you down. So if you're feeling like you're abused, definitely reach out to a professional counselor and get help. And it doesn't mean you're weak. It just means that you need help, you know, professional help. They go to school for this kind of thing. So a counselor would be great, you know, in getting you out of this situation. So
getting you out of the situation or helping you deal with it emotionally?
Well, I think it's a double there. I think both. You need help emotionally.
So let me back up on that question. But did your counselors help you get out of your relationship?
So the last one did. The last one, because we were in marriage counseling for 17 years. So that's a long time. That's a lot of counselors too. We had like over 13 counselors. I lost track, but that'd be a good guess. So the very last counselor, she gave up on counseling because, you know, the counselor didn't come down on me and like she wanted them to. And I know they saw the real problem.
Her.
Yeah, the real her. And that's why she jumped from counselor to counselor. It's like she didn't get what she needed. So, but anyways, I end up with the last counselor. He was a godsend. And I think they all were. You know, I got a little bit of everything out of all of them. But the last counselor, he wrote me a prescription and hand wrote it and handed it to me. And it said on it, "Your new life." And that meant so much to me, not just to say it, but to actually read it and have it there on paper. So that was a turning point. It was like, why I didn't know I could have a new life. You get into it and you don't want to give up. well, some things you need to give up on. In a toxic relationship, you need to get the heck out. There's some people can't be repaired. And I found that out through counseling, and it's not how much I try, because I tried so hard for years and years, and you could try to guess what they're going to do next or need next, and you could just spend your whole life walking on eggshells, basically trying to anticipate everything from them. So they're controlling you at that time. So if you're in a relationship like that, just get great counseling, and I
get
did
help. And
yeah.
And so, Victoria, what would be, I mean, you were in that, and you know what you didn't. I know what I didn't. I didn't tell anybody what was going on. Just like you said, we try to make the outside beautiful and all rosy. So what would you suggest somebody who's inside an abusive relationship do?
Well, there's a few different things. You have to start figuring out your exit plan. Like, what's that going to look like? And you might have to enlist, as Joe mentioned, a therapist or a divorce coach, but you need help. And sometimes you just need to ask one person. Really, you have to find the right person to ask, though.
Amen.
And so when you're navigating this, the other thing you have to realize is you need to gather your important documents, especially, your social security card, but just, your normal facts of living. You got to try to understand what it's going to take for this financial transition to occur too, because generally abuse doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It's
Right.
There's a financial component to it too. And so you need to start really planning ahead and figuring out how much it's going to take. Squirrel some money aside. This is probably going to be more expensive than you realize. And the sad thing is, if you have kids and you have to, well, they're minor kids, and you have to figure out a parenting plan and then a parenting strategy with this co-parent, you might be locked in litigation until the kid's 18. And that's just the sad reality of the situation, unfortunately.
Right.
And I think this is the worst thing people kind of have to get their mind around, that in divorce and an uncoupling, there's sometimes only two bad decisions you get to make, but one's a little less worse than the other. Or the trade-offs are different.
Right.
And so,
right.
Once you have a kid with someone, that other person will generally be in your life for the rest of all time. And so I think the more that you understand that you have to figure out how you're going to deal with each component, so you can really work with the professional that's trained not only in that, but also in high conflict situations, so you can actually use this period to retool your relationship and develop new skills. The horrible thing is sometimes in death, the person dies. In divorce, they continue to live.
Yes. And I find, one of the things that I would, because this is what I do, I help people create that exit plan. Like I currently have a client that I'll probably be talking to you about really soon. And these components of the exit plan are super important. Asking, the right person for help is important. And somebody who's trained, if you're in a very difficult relationship, somebody who's trained in that, like Victoria, obviously, a lot about that, because not only have you helped clients that have dealt with that, you yourself were in the middle of that, and yours was domestic violence. And so when we go through that kind of stuff, we learn what was wrong, and we learn what definitely would have helped if we'd have done that. So in my case, and when I tell my clients, I'm like, you have to tell some of those people that are closest to you what's really going on. Mm-hmm. They need to know. My mom had no clue. For 4 years, she had no clue what went on between us and why I left. It appeared on the outside that I left for another man, but that wasn't it at all. My family wouldn't support me, wouldn't help me. They weren't there for me. They all went and sat with him, literally. And so they weren't there. 4 years later, my mom had him come over. I was living with my mom at that time. And so she wanted him to come over for Thanksgiving. And so we're there for Thanksgiving. She's hoping that we'll get things put back together. My 2 boys and he was drinking, took me down, put me in a chokehold on the ground. And I didn't fight back. This is something I was capable of doing, but not in my mother's house. I wasn't going to fight back. And my youngest son had to pull him off of me. And my mom was mortified. She says, I never knew. And it's like, this is why I left. And had I been honest with those people closest to me, they would have known what was going on, and I would have had the support I need. So that is the one thing that I think is most important, is for us to tell at least one person that's close to us what's really going on. Now, did you happen to share that with your best friend?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yep. Yeah, he was a great support. And the only dilemma I had was, and I love him dearly, but he would add on more. Like he would just say how bad of a person she was. And it's like, dude,
it's not helpful.
It's not, I go, man,
that's where a coach
you're
is
like burying me
better.
because you're my board that I'm bouncing it off of. I don't need more stuff to carry. So that was the hard part. So, but yeah, I mean, you have to share it with somebody, but you don't want to carry their load of what they're dumping on you too about the same person. It's nice to know that they have the same feelings about her, but it's my turn to dump, this is my deal. So, a professional counselor would never do that to you and bury you. And my friend has a great heart. So, I couldn't have made it without him. So that was just one thing that it was not helpful, but all in all you need someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and from yours, Victoria, what's one thing? I know that you said to contact somebody that can help and figure out who the best one is, but being inside, what was one of the mistakes that you made that now you know?
I stayed too long.
I did too.
Yeah. And it took me so much to actually realize how messed up the relationship was. And there was just so much emotional immaturity on his end. And I kept being his parent. And at the end of the day, I just realized that was a bridge too far. But the codependency that I had to overcome and grow out of, that's been an interesting journey to heal and to really figure out why I picked this person, right? Because it's, I had a nice little, there's a lot of things that we have to examine about ourselves as well. And, I never had good boundaries, and I allowed other people to put their responsibilities on me. And I allowed people not to have accountability. So I found myself in highly toxic relationships that really were not beneficial to me. And I was taking care of these highly competent men that could absolutely kill it in their professional job. But then when they came home, they turned into helpless little infants. And that was not my job to take care of them, but I took it on. And it was just, unfortunately, I've had to go through the hard parts of my personality and realize that I need to be okay being alone. I need to be very comfortable with understanding if I don't heal these areas of myself, I might go back to the same man just with a different package. So understanding really the consequence of not handling that appropriately has motivated me to change as well, and to do the hard work and to go to therapy. I've been in therapy, gosh, the last probably 7 years or so, 5 or 7 years. It's been a long time. Ever since I left, because my brain was so scattered and so messed up. I had horrible like CPTSD, and I went to, I've done neurofeedback training, which helps your brain re-regulate itself. But after you go through highly traumatic events, your nervous system gets shifted so far over into the chaotic, into the fight or flight stage, that little things trigger you. And I was a female in finance in the Midwest. And so I was pretty much the lone female in a group of older men that really, they didn't really want me there. And so I kind of jumped from the frying pan into the fire, and it was a different dynamic. And so going through therapy has helped me really understand how to control my nervous system, regardless of the environment I'm in. And, people are incredibly resilient, and you will heal from this. This is not the end of the world. And most oftentimes, people don't want to go back and look at their past. And so the more you can really lean into learning about yourself and being kind. I had a lot of guilt. I had a lot of feelings that I had abandoned myself along the way, and I didn't even know how I could, reconnect with myself. I had just become, the caretaker. I was one trying to keep everything together. I had no joy in my life in my last years when I was with Voldemort. I mean, I was miserable. My hair was falling out. I look back at these pictures of myself and I look like a Skeletor. It's not attractive. And going through and learning how to be healthy, learning how to not take more on, and, really that post-divorce glow up is a real thing, because you finally have the energy for yourself. It's no longer flushing it down the toilet, trying to get somebody to pay attention and change, when the only thing they want to do is cause chaos and havoc in your life.
Right. And I totally, I get exactly where you're at. And, I know we're getting ready to wind things down here, but I know Joe dealt with a hair loss, and his siblings actually believe that his ex was poisoning him with something. And the pictures of him from back then were just horrendous compared to what he looks like now.
Right. As ashen, gray, very unhealthy looking. And my hair, I butchered my hair, so this was my deal. But anyways, my hair used to just fall out in my cereal bowl. And no kidding, no exaggeration. One sitting, I'd have 7 hairs in my bowl. And it's like, my God, there's not going to be any left. So I don't know, it was stress. Stress can kill,
Yep.
It doesn't have to be poison. I mean, it is poison. Stress is poison. So
yeah,
definitely. So I can, let all the viewers know. So before we start to close this down, first off, if the current viewers that are watching us now, if you have any questions, please type them in so that either Victoria or myself or Joe can answer them for you. And so Victoria, just kind of tell us how people can get a hold of you and what you can help them with. Just give a end view of that.
Yeah. So how I ended up leaving my abusive relationship was with a financial report. It is really corny to say, but math did save my life. I was stuck in this house with him, and I needed to figure out how this was going to go down. So I just started to figure out our cash flow and figuring out if I could assume the mortgage and what that would look like. But as I was also going through the bank statements, I realized how much he was spending on booze and broad ATM charges. So we probably know what that was going to. But it wasn't until I actually looked at those bank statements that it sunk into my mind, because there was physical evidence of how messed up he was. And it wasn't just me, 'cause I don't drink. I kind of am like the perfect person for you to pretend that you're sober around, and you have a like obsession with Listerine because you just want to kiss me all the time. Well, I later realized that he had a severe drinking problem and was hiding bottles of Captain Morgan in the garage, handles, like there were literally like half a gallon size containers. And so and also, alcoholics are very sneaky. They're very cunning and hide their disease very well. And he was in the full throes of his disease. So it was really helpful for me to understand the depth of it by looking at the bank statements. And so I then realized that there was 2 ways for us to kind of divide up the rest of the property. I didn't want to keep the house. I loved the house. Oh my gosh, to this day, I still miss it. And he was involved with my family business. It was just very painful for us to uncouple, and I wanted to love him for the rest of my life. And part of the healing journey I've had to go on is that, part of me will always love him, and I don't want to cause him pain. I don't want, what I do as a profession and how I help people to impact him negatively. And so I try to have care for him, but I also have to own what happened to me. And so I wrapped all of this knowledge up, and I have now helped people kind of do the same, because once I finally understood how we needed to divide things up, I could then go to him and have a completely emotionless conversation. When you're dealing with a highly toxic individual, the last thing you need is to use your divorce as an emotional torch.
Amen.
That is going to just blow things up. And I can tell you, when I have the opportunity to help people in the early stages of their divorce with a high conflict person, it's a lot easier, because after you start going through the emotions, and finances are inextricably tied to your feelings. People have negative financial feelings to begin with, and then you go through the divorce and boom, it all blows up. So the more you actually can figure out mathematically, the less you actually have to negotiate, because this is the financial facts of the situation. And so I was able to present to him an idea, and he checked my work and he said, let's go with it. Let's go with option A. And it was so remarkably easy. And our relationship, I was strangled, there's a few incidents where it was pretty rough. And so I did not know how this was going to go down. But in the end, the math spoke for me, and I just was able to kind of hide under that. I kept it completely emotionless and just focused on becoming less interesting to him and executing the financial plan. So,
and that's good. So how can people get a hold of you?
So you can get a hold of me at divorceanalytics.com. That's my website. I offer free 30-minute consultations. My goal is to help you figure out your best next steps. Sometimes that means working with me. Sometimes that means working with someone else. But the most important thing you can do is show up for yourself. And that means, pulling out the keyboard and shooting an email or whatever, but ask someone for help, whether it's me, whether it's Tina, whether it's, your pastor or a trusted friend. At least start somewhere. You have to begin slowly and just take one step every day.
And those are very important steps. You can reach me and Joe through the email at coachtinalynn@gmail.com, and that's here on the screen. And our website is divorcecoachspecialist.com. And again, it's coachtinalynn@gmail.com and divorcecoachspecialist.com. So if you are in a current situation where violence is happening now and you're in the United States, call 911. If you're in the UK, it's 999. If you are in a domestic violence situation, please call the domestic violence hotline at 800-799-7233. That number again is 800-799-7233. And we want to wish you safety, and please make sure that you are communicating with somebody. You need to build an exit plan to get out of this safely. There's a way to do it, and as Victoria has told you, there's a way not to do it. So thank you very much for being with us this evening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Good night.